Hey, it's at the letters for Thursday, January 21st. Arden Zwelling with Ben Nicholson Smith. Our producers are Christian Ryan and Mike Tassoni. And hey, if you are with us for the first time or the first time in a while, if you, for some strange reason, felt compelled to listen to a Blue Jays podcast this week, thank you very much. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a rating or a review if you want to help juice that algorithm. I'm on Twitter at Arden Zwelling. Ben's on Twitter at B Nicholson Smith. And hey, if you listen regularly, happy to have you. Thank you very much for your patronage. Ben, George Springer has signed a 6-year, $150 million contract with the Toronto Blue Jays. He's at least agreed to those terms pending a physical, not yet officially announced, but this is what is going to happen. In your heart of hearts, like just deep down inside, beyond that cold and logical reasoning that we have seen all off season, that something like this was likely to happen, deep down inside, did you believe that we would see this day?
I'm not trying to dodge your question here, Arden. I would say that I didn't believe, like I didn't have this like unshakable belief, but it's also not surprising to me at all. And so, I think that for people who have listened and stayed with us throughout a very quiet off season, they'd be well aware that we've maintained that the Blue Jays have interest, serious interest in these top players, and that interest seems real, and that they showed a willingness to spend before, and they're saying they're going to do it again. So that led me to take them at their word and say, all right, like they're not going to set this expectation unless they really believe they can deliver on it. And so that means that this isn't surprising to me, but at the same time, it's not like I was sitting there like with this full certainty to my core that this was going to happen.
It's so funny, like the narratives around the team, the discourse around the team, how different it was. So what, this happened Tuesday night, I guess. So how different it was like Tuesday afternoon versus Wednesday morning.
Or
And it's
try like
so
Sunday before they signed Yates and Chatwood.
right.
Whew.
And it's so reminiscent of last offseason in the day before Hyunjin Ryu was signed. It's the same stuff, right? Like finish second on everybody. They're being used as leverage by everybody. They're being played, and they won't make the aggressive move, and they won't go above and beyond and pay the price that has to be paid. I always thought this day was coming throughout the offseason. You can you can look at the receipts, man, from
Yep.
all offseason with ATL. Like very, very confident that something like this would happen. It just takes a bit more time sometimes, certainly this offseason, more so than others. But like I honestly was not shocked. Like I've been consistent in saying that I thought the Blue Jays would come away with somebody at the top of this market. You just look at the circumstances of this offseason. The Toronto Blue Jays being one of the few teams that is really willing to splash around some money and be aggressive. And you look at who's available on the market and what the team's needs were. I'm not surprised it lined up like this.
Yeah, I think that once Ross Atkins is talking about super high impact players, and then Mark Shapiro is like, it might be 2 elite players, it might be 4 very good players. Expectations at that point were set high. And for a period of weeks or months after those comments, fans were very skeptical. And I think understandably frustrated by how slowly things were moving. I mean, if you're a fan of the game, if you're a fan of the hot stove, this has been a pretty slow developing winter, and definitely a frustrating one to observe. So totally get that. But once those guys set those expectations, and we know we've talked about it at length, this is a very measured, deliberate front office. You might like it, you might not like it, but they are very measured and methodical. And so if they're going to set expectations that high, you would have to believe that they would have a very high degree of confidence that they could execute that.
Yeah, and it's a front office that has been a lot more transparent than maybe they get credit for. For all of the criticism that they receive, the vast majority of it really unwarranted. But there is like some warranted criticism of this front office. You want to look at
Right.
how Josh Donaldson's tenure ended in Toronto. You want to act at the fact that you've had trouble developing and acquiring outfielders, for a number of years until this offseason. Obviously, there's some warranted criticism, but a lot of it is like really unwarranted when you consider how clear they've been about what they're planning to do. Like, look, in 2016 and 2017, coming off of obviously the 2015 year, we all remember when this tenure for this front office began, they spoke about extending the competitive window. Perhaps, and this came a bit later, but perhaps beyond what they are even comfortable with, and they might have gone about things differently. But the passion and the success of 2015 compelled them to extend that window while modernizing the organization and beneath the surface sort of beginning a bit of an aggressive pursuit of young talent, an aggressive, you could call it a rebuild if you want. But they said they were going to do that, and that's what they did. Then you flash forward to 2018, 2019, Mark Shapiro, Ross Atkins talked about a soft reset. Like, Ross was on this podcast talking about a step back from contention, and he spoke about, you're likely never going to see a Houston Astros like 100 losses 2-3 years in a row type of thing, but we might take a little bit of a step back from really competing with the biggest teams and the best teams in the league in order to focus on development and focus on acquiring young talent and focus on, they wouldn't have been this direct about it, but in a lot of ways, like kind of clearing payroll and kind of like making, this budget sheet a lot more flexible so you can make a big acquisition in the future. They spoke about that. Mark Shapiro spoke about outspending revenue, like spending outpacing revenue at a certain point. You want to talk about spending outpacing revenue, like, hello, here is the year where you had zero revenue last season and now you're committing $150 million to a center fielder a year after you committed $80 million to a starting pitcher. They talked about that and they've done it. And so, like, I understand that people get a little turned off by how corporate the messaging can be sometimes. And I understand that humans are impatient by nature. And I know that, I just think people sometimes consume or at least buy into way too much just disingenuous commentary on this team and its futures. These are all reasons why, like, the doubt and the skepticism existed about whether or not this moment would happen, and the history of this club and the fact that they have obviously never made a financial commitment of this size before is reason why that skepticism existed. But if you just take what this front office has communicated at face value, and understand that they're working with a long-term plan and that wasn't going to happen overnight, and that a little bit of patience might have been required in 2017 and in 2018, it's really been pretty clear at each step of the process what was going to happen.
Right. And I think it's totally fair for fans after seeing one big deal, the Ryu deal, to say that, look at that and say, okay, does this mean that they're really going to be able to attract those free agents? Those questions, I think, are fair, especially because the Blue Jays have a lot of questions about their home turf. It's a really uncertain time just in Major League Baseball in general. And we did see the Jays come up short on a lot of different players. So totally understand that skepticism that existed. But man, did the Blue Jays ever push that aside, right? Like, to go out there and spend 150 million, like, that's a huge contract. Like, it's almost the size of the previous two biggest combined, and Russell Martin at 82 is their previous biggest free agent contract, and Hyunjin Ryu, that's 162, 150 for Springer. And look, like, setting aside the narratives, setting aside the size of the contract, the absolute best thing that a team can do if they're trying to get better is to acquire some of the best players in baseball. And George Springer fits in that category. So this is huge for the Blue Jays. It's, whether you like the front office or not, whether you believe the front office or not, those are questions that each fan will answer individually. And I suspect that that perception will change, or already has changed. But most importantly, George Springer is an elite player in his prime, and now he's part of the Jays core.
Yeah, it's a remarkable commitment. Like, it's a ton of money, and it is similarly remarkable that it happens at a time like this, coming off of a year in which there was no ticket revenue, coming off of a year in which you had to spend quite a bit of money to, like, retrofit Salem Field in Buffalo into something looking like a major league ballpark. Like, there's that the Blue Jays had to pay for that, coming off of, like, massive investments into Dunedin with the player development complex and obviously the upgrades to the stadium down there, coming off of a big splash for Hyunjin Ryu last offseason, and even forecasting ahead to 2021 when like you hope you're going to get some ticket revenue, towards the middle or end of the season, but there's no certainty of that. And it seems pretty clear that if this season starts on time, you're probably not going to be in Toronto and you're probably not going to be reaping much game day revenue. And even forecasting further ahead than that to the season following when there might be a work stoppage. So you're like, it's, it is a big commitment from ownership. And there's probably like a bigger conversation to be had about, how Mark Shapiro has been able to just kind of communicate with ownership and sell them on the long-term plan and get the franchise to a point where it is making, like you said, a free agent commitment that is nearly, like nearly double their biggest prior. But it also makes me think about like all the circumstances that have to line up to make a move like this. We talk about ownership being willing to make the financial commitment. The player also has to be willing to like come to your market, which is a big thing not to be overlooked. Like George Springer wants to be in Toronto clearly and like wants to be a Blue Jay. There also has to be market conditions that are favorable to you, which there certainly were this offseason, with the Blue Jays being one of the few teams actually willing to spend this level of money. And then you look at the fact that the Mets, I don't know if they completely took themselves out of it, but if they don't acquire Francisco Lindor, maybe they're a bit more aggressive than they were. They're bumping up against the what is really a salary cap in the competitive balance tax. So you look at the depressed market and just all the circumstances that have to line up. It really was a little bit of a perfect storm for the Blue Jays to execute a transaction like this.
Totally. And, at that point, leading up to this week, there was a sense that they were checking on all these guys and legitimate interest in JT Realmuto. I'm told that they met with him. Obviously, we know they met with Trevor Bauer. And DJ LeMahieu was a legit target of theirs. So it seemed like they had this clearance to spend a pretty significant. They obviously had this clearance to spend now that they've committed that money. And so that's a huge piece, right? To add to a group that otherwise is young and very affordable. But, again, to kind of bring it back on the field, Springer also brings that contrast to this young core because he's so experienced. He's done it for years. He's done it in the playoffs. And then you kind of combine that with these young up and coming guys who are trying to establish themselves. And you can see the appeal just on many, many levels here of what George Springer brings offensively, defensively. It's expensive, but good players are expensive. And I think that if you're a team in the Blue Jays position, this makes sense. Like maybe this is their kind of equivalent of the Cubs spending big on John Lester, and then that really advances their franchise. Or maybe it's not quite in 2021 that they take that step, and maybe it's more of the Padres adding a Hosmer or a Machado, and then eventually taking that step forward. But I think the Jays are a pretty good team now, like as it stands, and I think they're still going to get better. So Springer is the biggest part of that, and adding him is, it's just huge.
Yeah, when you are taking an offense that was already projected to be top 10 and improving it, right? So like you are really improving your run production. And I think coming into this offseason, that we know, like based on what the club has said, the biggest priority was run prevention.
Right.
But what opportunities are available to you when you can sign a George Springer? I mean, if that's something that is realistic, I think you make that move. And I think the fact that the Blue Jays went to 6 years and $150 million says a lot about how strongly they feel about how George Springer will age throughout this contract and about what he is going to do for this team. And if you just look at those projections, the highest leverage improvements that the Blue Jays could have made were obviously pitching, starting pitching in the bullpen, but center field, position player wise, like that was the biggest leverage improvement they could make. So it really was a perfect fit from that standpoint. Like you look at the the projected WAR on Fangraphs, and George Springer took the Blue Jays from being I think it was 19th projected at center field to like third or fourth. That's a massive swing. Like that is really big, a really, really big upgrade. And like, look, George Springer is really good. He's a really, really good hitter. He's a complete hitter. A guy who, like, it's kind of interesting to track his career progression because, when he was still a prospect with the Astros before he even made his big league debut, there were a lot of questions about whether this guy was going to strike out too much as a big leaguer and about the swing and miss in his game. And he arrived in the big leagues, and it was a little bit of an issue early on, early in his big league career. This is a guy that you could beat with breaking stuff. Like, this was a guy who you could get to expand the zone. But over the course of his first 7 years now, as a big leaguer, he has taken his strikeout rate progressively down. Like, he has gotten more disciplined and he has become a more discerning hitter. His strikeout rate has dropped in an era when strikeout rates league wide are going up, which is very, very impressive, particularly because he hasn't sacrificed power in order to do it. Like, you see a lot of like strikeouts and walks these days because everybody's trying to hit a home run. But he's been able to still hit a gang of homers while being more selective and discerning. That's extremely hard to do. Like, that speaks to how hard he really has worked in order to improve and to get better. Like, I would bet that's another thing that the Blue Jays felt really, really strongly about him, is that like clearly this guy has put in the work. And I'm sure that they did a whole ton of character background on him and a whole ton of due diligence. And I'm sure they feel pretty strongly that this is a guy who's going to continue doing the work so that maybe he can beat that typical age curve for outfielders like him.
Yeah, it's just a really intriguing combination. And clearly it starts on the field with what he brings. And you look at the defensive side of things, he can handle center field. He's a really fast runner. Offensively, like you said, he doesn't strike out a ton. He's got great power, 35 home run bat consistently in the course of a full season. He's got good bat to ball skills. I mean, he's in an era where, league average, it's probably 250 for batting average. You're looking at a guy who can easily hit 270, put the bat on the ball, make consistently good contact. So overall, this is an elite player, someone who in the course of a full season, you can kind of project him for 4 WAR, 5 WAR with the upside in a really good year to be an MVP candidate. Like, he's just that good. It's one of the biggest acquisitions that obviously I've seen the Blue Jays make in my time covering the team. You think back to Josh Donaldson and the kind of impact that had. Obviously, they don't all work out. Like, sometimes they acquire a Tulowitzki and you think it's going to be amazing and it doesn't happen. Or a Jose Reyes. Like, sometimes big deals don't work out, but the Jays were in a position where they had the chance to go after Springer, and without guarantees of what's going to come in the future, if you can get an all-star borderline MVP candidate, you got to do it.
So that's the optimistic side of the deal in terms of analyzing it. Let's take a look at the pessimistic side, which
is there one?
Okay, I think I can give you one.
Okay, let's hear it.
And I don't think we are doing our jobs as analysts if we do not mention that it is like, find me the free agent contract for an outfielder at the age of 30 or 31 for 5 or 6 years at $25 million per year that worked out in the long run. Does that exist?
Well, I mean, you're putting me on the spot here. I don't have that off handy.
I mean, I think you can go, especially in recent history, like look at the Jacoby Ellsbury contract, right? Like, that's a pretty similar.
Carl Crawford. I mean, Matt Holliday comes to mind as one that worked out great for the Cardinals. That's
it's hard to find one.
Jason Worth wasn't bad.
Okay, Dexter Fowler.
No,
doesn't look great.
Hayward,
Justin Upton.
not good.
Not great. Jason Hayward.
Yeah.
The Cubs got Jason Hayward at 26 years of age. So like 4 years younger than George Springer. I think George Springer actually turns 31 this year, but 26 years of age, they gave him like $180 million over like 7 or 8 years. And in the first year of that deal, it was like a 65 OPS plus. And I don't believe he cracked 100 OPS plus until like this last season, like 2020. So the first 5 years of that deal, like the first 4 years of it, not looking great. Like I said, Jacoby Ellsbury, 7 years, $150 million at the Yankees in like his age 30 season, played his last game at 33. Look, we'll see how the money's allocated here. Like, the Blue Jays might be able to like mitigate some of the risk by front loading this deal so that the final couple years, which like at 35, 36 for George Springer, when he's playing in a corner outfield spot or he's primarily a DH, Probably not going to look great at $25 million per, but if it's less and if you front loaded it now when you have financial flexibility and a lot of payroll room in order to take on a greater guarantee early on, maybe it looks a bit better. And like, look, like guys like Nelson Cruz exists, you know, like guys like certain guys can remain productive into well into their 30s. Like Michael Brantley exists. Jose Abreu and Hunter Pence, like we have seen it, but it's just very hard to find a deal of this magnitude for an outfielder at this age that has looked really good for a team 3, 4, 5 years out.
And a lot of the times that's just the nature of free agency, is you can find more deals that don't work out, especially toward the end, than ones that consistently year after year pay off, like the Matt Holliday deal, for example. So totally true. Now, I'm sure that this has been studied, by the Blue Jays internally.
Yeah.
And my initial response to your question there, like, is there a downside? Of course, there is downside. 150 million is a massive commitment. If he gets hurt, then you're stuck with that commitment. And if he deteriorates from a performance standpoint, then you're stuck with that. Now, I do think, it's not fair entirely to group Springer with speed first outfielders like Ellsbury and Carl Crawford, because those guys had so much of their value derived from their speed. So if you're Carl Crawford, you need to hit triples, you need to steal bases, you need to be an elite, in his case, left fielder. Same with Ellsbury. That is part of your game, a huge part of your game. Springer's fast, so that speed helps him. But it's not such a huge part of his offensive game. He doesn't really steal a ton of bases. He's not necessarily leading the league in triples. He basically is a masher. And so there is downside in this deal from the standpoint that any deal brings risk. Any big deal brings risk because of injury. And for him in particular, he's not going to be playing center field in 5 or 6 years. I mean, that's pretty much a given. So you are building in some decline. But I think from an offensive standpoint, there's no escaping risk if you're going to be a big player in free agency. Yeah. But if you're going to play in that arena, I think it's safer to go after the big bats, the guys whose offense is not built around speed, but an exceptional plate approach, exceptional power, consistent year after year production. That's why I like the Rendon deal for the Angels, for example. I mean, he's a guy who just brings offensive firepower year after year. And I think Springer's in that same category where I see this deal in the context of massive free agent expenditures. I see this deal as being even on the safe end of that spectrum.
And that's funny you mentioned Rendon, because that even gets back to what I was saying earlier about the circumstances that have to align for you to do something like this. Like George Springer should have been a free agent last year with Rendon.
Right.
Like his service time was manipulated grossly by the Houston Astros. Like he missed the free agency cutoff by 5 days. So he should have actually hit the market last year, got something closer to what Rendon did. By Springer hitting the market this year, not only is he available to Blue Jays now, but it actually even suppresses a little bit what he can earn in free agency, which made him a bit more available to to the Blue Jays. So you tie that in with like the market conditions, and look, I feel absolutely fine about the Blue Jays making this commitment. Like any commitment like this, like at age 35, age 36 for George Springer, like you're just hoping that like the bat ages like a Nelson Cruz bat, where it's like, okay, you're not providing a whole bunch of defensive upside here. Like you hope that it ages like a Michael Brantley bat even, right?
Yeah.
And in those final, couple years of this contract, you're still able to kind of juice like 2.5 wins, 3 wins out of a really good bat, even though the guy is like half the time playing right field and half the time you're DH. You're also hoping that he stays healthy to that point. Like that's another big thing here is the durability and how running around on turf for, it's not going to be this year because they're likely to start in Dunedin, but going forward, running around on turf in center field for 81 games a year, like what that'll mean to his durability long term, because you need to keep this guy as absolutely healthy as possible as one of the highest upside guys on your team. But yeah, look, like is $25 million per season AAV a lot? Sure. But that's what George Springer deserves as a 4 or 5 win player in this game, as a guy who has been consistent and gotten better. That's what Toronto has to pay to get players to come to Canada. Like you have to kind of compensate for the elevated taxes on high earners in this country and in this province, which are good things, by the way, because we all get health care and great, roads and public services and things like that. But when you're dealing with a guy who is an extremely high earner, making $25 million per year, you have to pay a bit of a Canada and a Toronto tax. Like, we knew that coming in, and the Blue Jays, I think, are paying it here. They had to pay it with Hyun-Jin Ryu and with Russell Martin. I guess the other downside, or the other question, is how much of George Springer's production was impacted by sign stealing in Houston, and how much was he helped by often having a pretty good idea of what pitch he was about to get, certainly through the 2017 season, which was when he really made some of the big improvements in terms of his approach, like in terms of his plate discipline and his strikeout rate and his walk rate. How do you feel about how Blue Jays fans should try to assess how much of his production is a product of the cheating?
Yeah, really, really fair question. I think that's going to be part of Springer's legacy from here on, really, as with all those Astros. Just to go back real quick to the question of the price tag here, I think, and Rendon in particular, we talked about it a few weeks ago. If you look at their offensive numbers, they're really comparable. And Rendon makes $35 a year on a 7-year deal. So Springer, one less year, which kind of makes sense given the timing at which they hit free agency, he's making $25 a year. So I think, and I don't even think the Rendon deal is bad. Like, I think that's a fair price for a great player. So again, it's a lot of money, but I think that it's reasonable. I think it's a fair price to pay for George Springer. Now, as for the question of Houston sign stealing, I mean, I can only assume that it helps, or that it helped when they were cheating. And they won the World Series, and that's a tainted World Series. No question about that. I still think, though, and I'm interested to hear where you land on this, Arden, but, I think when you look at Springer's consistent production, just at every spot of the way, high school, college, minors, majors, postseason, regular season, he has always been a great hitter. So I don't think that if you're the Blue Jays, you need to worry that he's not going to hit because he's not cheating anymore. Like, I think he's going to be fine.
It's interesting. So you look at the work done by Tony Adams, who is like, kind of he basically went back and like watched every game and listened for trash can bangs. And it's signstealingscandal.com is where you can find a lot of his data and his analysis, which is excellent and very useful for our purposes, because that demonstrates that George Springer received the second most trash can bangs on the team that year in 2017. Okay. So you hear some commentary about, oh, well, he didn't participate in it that much. And, he kind of said that he wasn't. No, look, indisputably, George Springer cheated. And George Springer furthered his career through the sign stealing scheme. He was aware of it. He participated in it. He benefited from it. You cannot dispute that. So that is damning. Now, the other side of that coin is you look at some of the analysis that was done by Fangraphs that demonstrates that he was actually hurt in high leverage situations when he was receiving a trash can bang, which is interesting. He absolutely thrived in medium leverage situations when hearing a trash can bang. So I think that more than makes up for how he's kind of hurt in the high leverage spots. But I guess the biggest thing that speaks to his continued viability as a really, really good hitter in baseball is just how good he was in 18 and 19. And in 18, we don't know how much
20.
sign stealing was going on. Like, we know what was happening in 2017 and 18 might have still been occurring, might have not, who knows. He had a career year that year. Did really, really well. And as far as we know, the trash can scheme had ceased by that point. And in 2019, well, he took a little bit of a step back from 18, still really, really, really good in a shortened season. That was short season 2020. We're talking about 2019, like still really, really good. And in 2020, was awesome. So assuming that 19 and 20 are, that signs were not being stolen, although really signs are always being stolen.
Right.
Really, every time you watch a baseball game, someone's cheating. right? Yeah, remember that.
Whether it's grip on the ball or whether it's, there's a
Somebody
lot
has
going
something
on.
smeared under the brim of their cap, right? Somebody's getting signs. Somebody is benefiting from taking a banned performance enhancing drug. They're every time you watch a baseball game, somebody's cheating at some point. So like you can paint it both ways. Where like George Springer, some of his greatest success occurred when the sign stealing scheme was clearly at its height, but he has also shown in the last couple of years that he can still be very, very productive. We assume with no longer stealing signs.
Yeah, that's right. I think that if you're the Blue Jays, I just don't think that would be a big concern. I suspect not. We haven't heard from them on this
Yeah.
yet. Of course, the deal's not official, but it's hard to imagine that would be a major concern. And it's hard to, I don't know, like with so many of the big free agents out there, like you can usually find holes in their resume or in what they bring and think, I don't know, he's just not a great fit. But the reason that the Blue Jays, a very methodical, very measured front office, seem comfortable, evidently are comfortable spending $150 million on George Springer is because there's just, it's not to say that he's perfect. No player is perfect, but he's a great fit. Like he offers a lot. And to the extent that any player can no one comes without risk at all. But I think it's a great addition. I think it's the best move the Jays have made in a long time. We'll see where it lands. Might not work out as well as we think it will, but right here as we record this, I think this is an awesome move by the Jays.
No, the commitment speaks to how strongly they feel about how good he is going to be. And so a lot of these kind of like downside effects that we're talking about, like the Blue Jays are betting that George Springer is going to beat them. Like they are betting like he is going to beat the aging curve for outfielders. They're betting that, he is going to be in the vast minority of like really, substantial contracts for outfielders that work out, like an extreme minority. Like they're betting that he's going to be that guy. They're betting that he's going to continue to, demonstrate the improvements he's made in terms of his plate approach. They are betting on the impact he's going to have on a young clubhouse, which like you can't quantify it, but it's certainly a part of this.
And it's a statement too to this team.
Like certainly something big. And yeah, and even just what it says to baseball and other free agents that you're trying to lure, you would assume there is like some sort of impact there in terms of just making your franchise a more desirable place to be. Again, it's tough for us to talk about because we can't quantify it, right? We don't really know. But like there are a lot of interesting kind of downstream effects with this signing that are maybe a bit more abstract, but that doesn't mean that they're any less meaningful. Let's step away. That is the George Springer discussion. When we come back, we should clean up some pitching moves that the Blue Jays have made. We should probably say something about Michael Brantley and so much more when we continue on At the Letters. It continues on At the Letters. Arden Zwelling, Ben Nicholson Smith. Thanks as always to our producers, Mike Tassoni and Christian Ryan. Ben, we should mention that Michael Brantley was very nearly a Toronto Blue Jay. He's not going to be one. He's going to be a Houston Astro, but in a very like Dexter Fowler-ish way, if you remember that from spring training, like 5 or 6 years ago, wherever Dexter Fowler had like a deal in place with the Orioles and it was reported, and we thought he was going forward, and then all of a sudden, like a day later, he was walking onto the field in at the Chicago Cubs spring training facility. Sort of similar situation here with how this played out. Like, what do you think that the Blue Jays' pursuit of Michael Brantley really meant in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, it ended up being, it was a wild couple of days, obviously, on Twitter for those of us who choose to spend our time on that platform. There's a lot going on, right? There's, of course, Brendan Kuhn, a fan, broke the news of the Springer deal. And then the very next day, it starts to seem as though, wow, Michael Brantley is going to be joining the Blue Jays too. And that's a report that Sportsnet had. It's a report that a lot of other outlets had. I don't know the whole story there. I want to know, obviously. I think that clearly many people were under the impression that this was going to happen. And clearly it didn't. So that's just stating the obvious. What it means to me is that there was some genuine interest from the Blue Jays in Michael Brantley, which is understandable. I don't think he's a perfect fit. And I'm not just saying that because they didn't land him. Like, he's a great hitter, really, really good hitter. Doesn't make him a perfect fit for the Blue Jays. So really interesting stuff. And leaves the Blue Jays obviously without Michael Brantley and moving ahead in other directions. But clearly there was, and this is according to, I can say the people that I've spoken to said that there was legit interest and getting to the point of having some serious contract talks there, but it just never got across the finish line.
Yeah, stuff like this happens. It's probably more common necessarily than it seems. I mean, at the 11th hour, all kind of things can go wrong with a negotiation or with a deal. Whether it's you get a medical on a guy that reveals something. I'm not saying this is what happened in this case, by the
Right.
way. I'm just listing possible outcomes, but like possibilities. Like you get a medical that reveals something you didn't know before, and that kind of changes things for you. With the Fowler situation, like there was a bit of a snafu with an opt out in it, and some, like, I don't know if it was miscommunication or whatever, but so there's clearly something that the 11th hour of kind of getting that deal done that all of a sudden one side didn't like a lot of times. And a lot of times, like a player who was leaving a market like Houston with Brantley that he's been in for a while and that clearly likes being in, wants to be in, will get an offer from another club and go back to the original team and be like, hey, I got this other offer. Do you want to match it? I'll stick around. And sometimes things change that way. So like this type of stuff occurs. I agree with you that Brantley was an imperfect fit. He is like half of a fit because his bat would have been tremendous for this lineup. Like it would have been great. And if the Blue Jays had a wealth of DH plate appearances open, like I'd be all over this move. I would have thought it would have been great, but they don't. So positionally, it was a really tough fit considering the current construction of the roster. It would have necessitated a trade of likely an outfielder. Whether that, like Randall Grichuk, it is unlikely that there's really any trade value there. So you're probably looking at Lourdes Gurriel Jr. or Teoscar Hernandez.
Or you trade Grichuk for not much.
Right. Yeah, you could do that. I think the Blue Jays, just with where they're positioned right now and what they're trying to do, I think it would have made more sense for it to be Hernandez Gurriel. And man, like what a high leverage decision that would be, considering the the careers those guys have had and the peaks and the valleys, the potential that they have shown at times, but then obviously the very like clear warts on their resume and the slumps that they've had and the defensive troubles that they've had, and the times that they've both had to be demoted to the minors like in pretty recent history. Personally, like I kind of want to see it through with both those guys. Like I don't know, I don't have enough information and I am not smart enough to really predict like which one of those guys is going to work out. If both of them are going to work out, neither of them are, it would have been like a real test of the Blue Jays analysis of their players and their interpretation of the data they put up and their understanding of them, to try to figure out like which one of those guys to bet on and which one of those guys to keep. Like, so in a funny way, like it would have been kind of interesting to watch it play out actually, now that I think about it. But in another funny way, Brantley just kind of gets added to this pile of players that the Blue Jays have finished second on this year. I know that, like in the wake of the George Springer signing, it's not, people aren't as, freaking out as much about it anymore, but like put him on the pile of the Ha-Seong Kim and Tomoyuki Sugano and Francisco Lindor and DJ LeMahieu.
Kluber.
Another runner up, right?
Hendricks.
And this is even an interesting question. Maybe we should talk about this in the first half. If the Blue Jays finish one of those deals, do they still sign George Springer?
Depends on the deal. Lindor is the one that gives me the most pause. Like if they finish that deal for Lindor, I don't know if we're talking about George Springer today.
Yeah.
And either way, you're talking about a very good offseason, so that's fine. But if they sign Ha-Seong Kim, yes, they still get Springer. If they sign Kevin Gausman, yes. Sugano,
DJ LeMahieu?
Maybe not. Maybe not. But maybe. Maybe. Yeah, it may be. To go back to that hypothetical, right, where they're talking about Michael Brantley and there was serious interest. How close it got, I don't know. Obviously, some people thought there was an agreement in place and that got reported. But there wasn't an agreement in place. Now, I think Grichuk would have been the one they would have traded. And I think Brantley, as you said, would have made this lineup like just absolute horrible experience for opposing pitchers. Like, imagine you'd have 3 lefty hitters in there too, in Brantley, Rowdy, and Cavan Biggio. You'd have 6 right-handed hitters. Just like the matchups would be impossible. The bottom third of the order on a given day might have been something like Danny Jansen, Rowdy Tellez, and Randall Grichuk, depending on who they trade, like Lourdes, maybe. Like, it just would have been stacked. But we've also seen, and you and I, and probably some of our longtime listeners, watched 3 years, or at least 2 and a bit years, of Kendrys Morales taking DH at bats and not doing much with them, and that's a guy who was a really good hitter, aging, good bat to ball skills, kind of a similar offensive profile to Michael Brantley in some ways, and it didn't work out. Now, the Jays know Michael Brantley very well. He's in better shape than Kendrys Morales was. He can still play some left field, not a pure DH, but I don't know. Like, I think, and someone, some people in the industry from the outside looking in look at this too, and they're like, Brantley's great, but he's not the Jays' biggest need.
No, it almost feels like it was a bit of a, just kind of a nice gesture towards George Springer in a way, because the two guys are really tight, obviously. And I think that Michael Brantley's had a really substantial impact on Springer's career. He's certainly spoken like it has. And like Brantley would have brought some really interesting things. I mean, even we talked about the intangibles in the first half. I mean, by all accounts, and you never really know, but by all accounts, this is like an A+ clubhouse guy to have around.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the type of dude that you want your young players learning from. So I think there would have been a lot of benefits there. It just would have kind of already deepened what is already a little bit of a logjam. Like when you think about outfield, first base, DH, in the outfield, you're now looking at Springer, Gurriel, Hernandez, Grichuk, and then Vlad and Rowdy Tellez at kind of first base, DH. Like, that is more players than positions. But like logjams, they're not always a bad thing. Like
they disappear.
Yeah. Log jams are actually often a good, like a log jam is another way of saying like you have depth. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So like why are the Los Angeles Dodgers so good? Because they have log jams, like a lot of log jams
by design.
Right. And a lot of different lineup permutations and batting orders that they can throw out, a lot of different ways they can kind of construct their lineups to exploit the weaknesses of the opposition. So like if they had Brantley, someone would have had to be moved.
Yes.
Even right now, it looks like maybe somebody should be moved, but I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah.
I have no issue carrying all these guys.
Yeah. You have a good bench. Fine. No problem there.
Yeah. And if everybody is healthy, Rowdy Tellez or Randall Grichuk might get a little sore about their playing time here and there.
That's right.
But when is everybody healthy? Like somebody from this group is going to spend substantial time on the IL this season. Like,
right.
That is the most likely outcome.
And like your choices are, okay, you have a player who's a little unhappy, or maybe 2 players who are a little unhappy, or everyone's thrilled. They're getting all kinds of at-bats, and you've got Alan Hansen taking at-bats, and you've got Socrates Brito taking at-bats, and it's like, that's not better. Like you'd rather have these guys say, man, this lineup is too good. I can't push my way into it. That's better.
Yes, and everybody's winning, which tends to paper over a lot of these issues. If things don't go well and if the Blue Jays are losing, then that's a whole nother issue, and maybe these things become a bit more magnified. Just win, and everybody's happy, and nobody cares. Clearly, like I think I am not surprised. A lot of people looked at the Brantley move and said, "Is that where the Blue Jays really need to upgrade?" Because it's the pitching staff where they need to upgrade. Now it's pitching staff where they've needed to upgrade the entire offseason. But now more than ever, now that you've added George Springer, I think you absolutely go find somebody to play third base. I don't think you necessarily have to find like premium, top of market, high price talent. Like I think you want to bring in like a Marcus Semien, to fill that role for like a year or two until Jordan Groshans is ready to take over, or Austin Martin. If you want to get Didi Gregorius, like fine, like absolutely do that. But I think the bulk of your remaining capital this offseason needs to be directed towards addressing a pitching staff, which on both the starting and relieving side is still projected to be in the bottom half of baseball.
Totally agree. I think the Jays are actually in a point now and I got to be careful what I suggest or wish for here, because this offseason has already progressed slowly enough. But I do think they're at a point right now where they don't have to rush things. They already have Springer. This offseason is going to be good. It's already good. They've had a good offseason. Not that that's the be all end all. I know it's one part of an ongoing process of improving the team, but they've already had a successful offseason to a large extent. It's not done. It's not done, but the pieces are in place for them to have a good winter. And so that means that I don't think, as you said, you're not going to go and get into a bidding war over Justin Turner right now.
Yeah.
You're not going to overwhelm Didi Gregorius with a 3-year deal. Like, just, you can wait and let the Reds sign someone, let the Phillies sign someone, let the Dodgers sign someone. Maybe someone else goes off the board, and maybe you get Semien on a 1-year deal, or you get Didi, or you get Andrelton Simmons and he plays third base, or shares time at short with Bo. Like, there are options on the infield. So you wait on that, in my opinion, and you sign some pitching.
No, if you end up with like Tommy La Stella at the end of that process, that's fine for a year.
It's not the worst thing. It's really
Honestly,
not,
no.
like, and this, or Colton Wong, like, there are enough options out there that they don't have to push it. And I wrote this last night, and it was such an exhilarating, tiring, like crazy, hectic couple of days. But it doesn't mean that just because they've signed George Springer, and now, the best way to put it is they're well on their way to having a good offseason right now. They're well on their way to doing that. So you don't have to finish everything right now. They still have 3-4 weeks before spring training. That gives them time to continue selling themselves to these free agents. The free agents obviously see that this team is serious about improving, and you can let the market come to you a little bit.
No, it's the biggest question is what they do to the rotation, what they do on the starting side. Massive question is whether or not Trevor Bauer is still an option, and whether or not they're still in that market. I think if Trevor Bauer is looking for 5-6 years and the high, big 9-figure deal, probably not going to be realistic for the Blue Jays after the Springer signing. If Trevor Bauer is open to a short-term possibility, as he has said, if he is open to 1 year, 2 years, super high AAV, well, that starts to make a little bit of sense for the Blue Jays because they have room in the payroll now, because they can fit that in now. The downstream effect of the Springer signing is that the Blue Jays have to be very careful with their budgetary commitments for 24, 25. Because look, Bo's going to get expensive and Vlad's going to get expensive. Or at least you hope they do. You hope they continue to be really good and start getting expensive through arbitration and possible extensions there. You hope Nate Pearson's getting expensive there. You hope that next off season you're making another big addition in free agency, or at least you want to leave some room to be able to do that next winter if there is another area of this roster that you really need to supplement and to upgrade. So a long-term deal for Trevor Bauer right now doesn't make a ton of sense, but short-term one, if he is still open to that unique structure, that does raise my eyebrow a little bit, because if it's not going to be Bauer, then you're going to the second tier of 2 to 3 years for Odorizzi or Walker, Masahiro Tanaka. Then beyond them, the trade market for starting pitching seems to have relatively dried up. Maybe the Cincinnati Reds will talk about Sonny Gray, but it doesn't seem to be a lot of options out there. So to me, the big fulcrum here is Bauer.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good read of the situation. I think, at this point, the best option I see for the Blue Jays is Tanaka 1 year. Like, if he's willing to do that, and there was reporting that he would take 15 to 20 over 1 year, do it today. 1 year, 20, done. Like that to me that would be the number one. Bauer is interesting. Like, Bauer's a really good pitcher, and he would make this rotation a lot better. I don't know, I agree with your reasoning. I don't think you go out there and you push for 6-7 years. Just don't. And I honestly don't think the Jays were going to do that, even if they missed on Springer. I don't know. I just had a hard time seeing that. That's me speculating, but I don't know. I think for Bauer, you could do a 2-3 year deal. The question, of course, is what's the AAV on that deal? Would you be, as you look at this through the vantage point of the Toronto Blue Jays, would you be comfortable offering 35 times 3, Arden?
Yeah. No, I would. Yeah, definitely.
And
but with this discussion, I'm thinking even shorter. I'm thinking 1 year 40,
Sure. 1 year 40 would be fine. Yeah. No problem there.
I'm thinking like, I don't know, 2 years, high 70s.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder, but it seems like Trevor Bauer might be motivated to set an AAV record, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you could find a way to do that with him on a short-term deal when you have room in payroll to do, I mean, I think there's a way to make it make sense for both sides there, I think.
Yeah. I heard the Dodgers were looking at that. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I mean, that if that's it mitigates some of that long-term risk and preserves some of that flexibility that you're going to need. Lourdes in his fourth year of ARB is going to be expensive. Teoscar, we assume, is going to be expensive. So it's interesting. But yeah, to me, you keep Bauer on the radar. Tanaka, I would make that offer today and see if he takes it. And then beyond that, you
That's the
could do
big
2
question.
years for Walker, 3 for Odorizzi, with two, maybe 3 for Odorizzi would be fine. Like, you need good players. Like, they're not all going to be super exciting.
Yeah.
And George Springer is like one of the best players in baseball. It doesn't mean that every ad has to be like this all-star ad. Odorizzi, I know people are kind of, so for some reason, people like don't like the idea of Jake Odorizzi, but he's a good pitcher and you need more good pitchers.
Yeah. No, he'd be fine. It's
Yeah,
like, for some reason, people were really sour on Kevin Gausman. It was like, what?
right.
Like, he's really
Gosman's
good.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's super legit. So yeah, beyond those names we mentioned, like, you need somebody to become available via trade who's just not on our radar right now. That would be one thing that could change this. Another thing the Blue Jays could really use is like an internal breakout. Like, man, if somebody from, and guys who have had opportunities like a Sean Reed Foley or TJ Zoik, or some of these names we've seen like make starts.
Merriweather, Hatch.
Yeah. Like, if somebody just showed up and it was like, hey, I can actually, replicate the production of an Odorizzi or a Gosman, except I am in like my second year pre-arb, that would be huge. I haven't seen that yet. I think the Blue Jays have some really interesting pitching, like on the kind of long-term horizon. When you look at like guys like Kloffenstein and Pardinho, Simeon Woods Richardson, but in terms of like impacting this rotation opening day 2021, uh, I don't see the internal option, so I do think they still need to supplement starting wise. I think they still need to supplement the bullpen. I think
Yeah.
there's, another bet or two to be made on kind of a low risk, high upside, like Alex Colomé type, or like David Robertson, or like if Garrett Richards was willing to work in relief, which I don't know, he might still want to be a starter, but that's a guy with like
Yeah.
wicked stuff. And
Interesting. Yeah.
if he was willing to come out of the bullpen on like kind of a 1 year show me deal, like, great. Like, I think there's still a bet to be made there. We know the Blue Jays are talking to Brad Hand, but I think Hand probably wants multiple years,
Yes.
and a pretty good AAV. I think right now it would make sense to just make kind of another bet on a 1 year guy.
I'd be fine. Like, if they were to offer 16 or 2 to Hand, no, I think that'd be reasonable.
Yeah.
He's good. He's good. You need more good pitchers. And like, the moves they made were interesting. Chatwood and Yates. And I think this is the first time you and I've really
Yeah, we haven't
talked
talked
about it.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's because it obviously got overshadowed. I love the Yates deal. Like, I think that deal, he was one of the game's best relievers in 2019. And like, unreal numbers. Like, he struck out 42% of the hitters he faced. His ERA was 1. He led the league in saves. Great numbers. Last year, obviously, he had bone chips removed from his elbow and the numbers weren't there, but the underlying stuff wasn't totally worrying. So I think that's a great deal. The Chatwood one, to be totally honest, I'm not sure I really get, but the Jays like what they see. You wrote about Chatwood, Arden. I mean, I don't know how you feel about these ones, but I think the Yates one at least looks great.
Chatwood is my guy, but I
Really?
wanted to, yeah, I don't know. He's like he's the type of guy that I always love, right?
Right.
Where it's like he's got some really unique traits and some really cool characteristics, and like hasn't been able to put them together. Like, it's similar to like Robbie Ray, where I'm like
Yes.
so intrigued by Robbie Ray, right? Where I'm just like, man, if somebody could just figure this guy out, right? Like, you look at just like the palette that you were working
Mhm.
with there and what this guy does. You look at the spin rates, and you look at the variety of pitches he throws and the options that are there in terms of attacking hitters and setting them up. Like Pete Walker and Matt Bushman are just really like getting this really interesting project to work on. So like those are the guys that always like intrigue me, right? Because it's like, yeah, I get it, Liam Hendricks, you're good. Like, like
Right.
you're gonna be good. We get it. Like it's like, hey, could you take this guy from somebody who has a lot of potential and help him realize it? Can you help develop that and unlock that? That's really, really interesting to me. Getting back to Kirby Yates, like that's gonna be it's gonna be cool to watch him pitch because he is like a super unique profile.
Yep.
Like doesn't throw particularly hard, like spitting stuff, like doesn't even throw a breaking ball, right? Like just fastball split. That's
Yeah.
all that he throws.
And it's like, look up, if you haven't seen them, look up some of these clips on like Pitching Ninja. It's great.
Yeah.
Like the splitter, it just like dives, and it's obviously hard to hit.
Oh, no, totally. It's like it's a super interesting profile, and like, look, the health is the biggest thing, right? Like, you always grit your teeth a bit when it's an elbow issue. If it's just removing, bone chips, you hope that that's relatively minor, and like there's a good track record of guys coming back from that and being fine. But look, like if he was fully healthy, and if there was a better certainty that he could be his 2019 self again, he would have had a much more robust market. He would have been looking at something closer to what Liam Hendricks got,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So like it is a great bet by the Blue Jays. And the
Yeah.
great thing about Kirby Yates, he doesn't walk guys. Like, he's just in the zone. And like there's, it's like one of those like cliches. It's a cliche for a reason. Like the biggest thing coming out of the bullpen is throwing strikes.
Yeah.
And he throws strikes and he attacks. It's the way just his movement profiles and his like what he uses and just the way he pitches. I mean, it's super, super interesting. I can't wait to watch that play out. And everybody's mileage is going to vary, and my mileage on this goes a lot further. I'm very interested to see how Tyler Chatwood plays out, just because of what he, just if you can unlock what clearly is there. And like the Blue Jays are not the first organization who have thought that they can unlock that. But I think that as a reliever now, like strictly as a reliever, stuff ticks up. We saw him when he was coming out of the bullpen for the Cubs, like 96 to 99. If he can really kind of focus his arsenal and focus his attack plans, you look at his numbers second and third time through the order, and they're pretty salty. So if he's really just seeing a hitter once and that's it, you look at the different ways the Blue Jays could utilize him. Like he could piggyback off of a starter who is like going 2 times through and done, right? Like imagine him coming in after Robbie Ray,
Right.
he could start a game and face the lineup one time, and then you're bringing in somebody else after him. He could see leverage. He could mop up. Like there's a lot of different ways you can utilize them. I just think it'll be an interesting weapon to watch for like the upside nerds like me.
It sounds like a great guy to sign to a minor league deal and bring him to spring. I mean,
How
yeah,
dare
like I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm not. Look, Tyler Chatwood, in the course of his 3-year deal with the Cubs for $38 million, just didn't pitch well, and the Jays are making a bet.
Strikes.
Yeah, it didn't throw enough strikes, and the Jays are making a bet that will change. So, am I impressed by that deal? No. But hey, the goal isn't to impress me on January 21st either. So we'll see what happens. And honestly, I think the Yates deal is great. And I think the Springer deal, just to zoom out to the big picture, like they're a way, way, way better team than where they were last time we recorded, right? Like they've added one of the best players in baseball, a reliever who we both agree is really, really intriguing and has been really good, and another guy who's at least intriguing, and we'll see.
Hey, don't sleep on that Tyler Chatwood cutter that he developed in Chicago as well, which is a real weapon, a real out pitch, getting
man.
a lot of swing and miss.
I
Don't
feel
sleep on the high spin fastball used up in the zone a la Thomas Hatch to exploit uppercut swings looking for launch angle. All right.
Hey, he would not be the first reliever to succeed in the bullpen after having some struggles in the rotation. I think, you know what? This is telling me one thing. We are going to have a Tyler Chatwood over under this year.
Oh, for sure.
And I'll be taking the under, and we're going to have to find it. You'll have to take the over. It's going to be good.
But yeah, just to wrap up, you make a good point. The Blue Jays are a much better team today than they were last time we recorded. Last time we recorded, I think, assuming a 162 game season, which is a very dangerous assumption, but just for the purposes of this exercise, let's do that. You could have seen the Blue Jays as like 82 win team, somewhere in there. Your mileage may vary. Could have been 81, could have been 83. Yeah, George Springer, that is I mean, Zips thinks he'll be a 4-win player. I mean, he's been a 5-win player. A 4-5 win upgrade on, let's say, an 82 win projection. All of a sudden, you are looking at like 86, 87 wins. Expanded postseason, that should definitely be good enough. But like at 86, 87, it's like, oh, another couple improvements. If you get like a 3-win starting pitcher and, a couple 1-win relievers, there's 5 more. All of a sudden you're in the 90s, and it's like, hey, now you're contending for an AL East division title.
Yep.
So still work to be done, but the Blue Jays have just like raised their ceiling and their floor really dramatically in the last week.
Big time, big time. I agree with the kind of ballpark numbers you're throwing out there as far as win projections. I've been checking Fangraphs to see if they have a kind of updated projection on that. But I think fair to say, going into the year without any additions, probably project them to be 500-ish, give or take. Obviously they were 32-28 last year, lost a couple players. You project some improvement. So yeah, around 500. Add Springer, huge addition right there. And Yates and Chatwood. So all of a sudden, I think right now, probably put them in the upper 80s as far as like 86, 87 right now, with a chance like you go out and add Colton Wong, 1.5, and let's say it's Jake Odorizzi, 2 wins. Like you could be projecting close to 90 wins, which isn't the Yankees. The Yankees are way better than that, and the Yankees are going to be the favorites entering this year, as they should be in the AL East. But man, like they have a chance to be one of those teams that's really, really in the hunt from day one, a legit contender. That would be really interesting to watch.
No, yeah, the Blue Jays aren't going to be the out and out favorites in the AL East, but you get it close enough so that it's realistic that like, oh, hey, if the Yankees have some injury troubles and if their rotation like underperforms, and hey, if we get an internal breakout and if George Springer's just as good as we believe he's going to be, like if we get really good outcomes, like we can be right there with them, challenging, playing like late in the season, like games that matter for the division, which
Absolutely.
it's going to be really cool. So exciting times to be a Toronto Blue Jays fan. That's going to be it for us. That's Ben Nicholson Smith. I'm Arden Zwelling. Our producers are Mike Tassoni and Christian Ryan. We thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on At the Letters.